In the remote village of nestled deep within the damp folds of 18th century England, the air was thick with secrets, the kind of secrets that cling to the walls of old stone cottages like ivy, creeping, silent, and impossibly ancient. It was here, amid the fog and the gnarled trees that clawed at the sky like desperate hands, that a girl named Elspeth would shatter the fragile veil between past and present. For Elspeth was no ordinary child. Before she could even speak full sentences, she carried memories, not of her own infancy, but of a life she had never lived. A stern man whose faith was as unwavering as the ancient oaks surrounding the village. He listened to Elspeth's tales with furrowed brow. Agnes noted how Elspeth's pale skin bore a chill, as if she carried within her the cold touch of death. One storm-racked night, under a sky ripped by lightning, they brought her to the edge of the village graveyard, a place thick with moss and the scent of damp earth, where forgotten bones whispered beneath ancient stones. Elspeth knelt, tracing the names on the cracked markers with trembling fingers until she stopped at one. Isabella Crane, aged 9, 17, 16. Her breath caught, and with a voice that was not quite her own, she whispered, "That was me." Her remedies soothed the girl's physical ailments, but did nothing to quiet the turmoil within. For the tale of Isabella Crane was a dark one, a story of a young girl found dead under suspicious circumstances in a manor house some 80 years prior. Rumors spoke of jealousy, betrayal, and a secret lover whose rage had claimed her life. Flickering lights near the old manor's ruins, where Isabella had once lived. The past was no longer buried. It was clawing its way back, and Elspeth was its unwilling herald. But the crime had never been solved, buried beneath layers of time and silence. Instead, Elspeth's memories grew sharper, more insistent. She began to reenact scenes in her play, warning other children to stay away from certain parts of the village, parts where the earth seemed restless and the shadows deeper than anywhere else. To him, these stories were blasphemous, or the devilish trickery, dangerous things whispered by a child who should be innocent. Yet even he could not deny the strange clarity in Elspeth's voice, the way her gaze would shift into something older, something knowing. At times, it seemed as if her eyes peered beyond the present world, as though they glimpsed the beyond, or was something far more unsettling at work. The soul's restless journey through time, dragging memory and pain like a shadow that refuses to release its grip. As fear and fascination grew, so too did the division among the villagers. Some saw Elspeth as a cursed vessel, a sign of God's judgment. Others believed she was a messenger, a bridge between worlds that mortals should not cross. Memories dark and fractured, whispered by a soul-worn raw with terror. Elspeth's parents, humble folk of the village, were initially perplexed, then deeply disturbed. Their daughter spoke of places she had never seen, people she had never met. She described a cold, stone chamber where shadows danced with flickering candlelight and the sharp scent of blood lingered in the air. Her nights were haunted by screams, not her own, but those of a young girl calling for mercy. The villagers, steeped in superstitions older than the church itself, whispered of witchcraft, possession, and curses laid by restless spirits. But Elspeth's words were too vivid, too precise to be mere fantasy. She described a man with a scar across his cheek, a figure clad in black who had come into her home, a man who had taken her life in a final, brutal act. This man's face was etched into her memory like a brand, and she named him aloud, even though none in the village bore such a mark. She spoke of a garden with thorny vines, of a locket dropped and lost beneath the cold earth, and of a secret hidden behind a cracked wooden panel in an old manor. The parish priest, Father Aldwin, was summoned. Local healer Agnes McCrae was called upon, a woman whose knowledge of herbs and spirits was both revered and feared. Elspeth's parents grew desperate. They sought answers beyond the mortal realm. The village was thrown into chaos. Elspeth's uncanny knowledge sent ripples through what were these mere tales of a child's imagination. In the darkening days that followed, strange occurrences began to haunt the village. Livestock found mutilated without explanation, whispered voices in the dead of night. The shadows that clung to Bornema deepened, twisting like serpents among the bare trees. As Elspeth's memories grew sharper, more insistent, each breath she took seemed to pull her deeper into the horror that was not hers yet felt unbearably real. They sought solace in the village's fragile alliances, Father Aldwin's prayers, Agnes McCrae's herbs. She refused to play with other children, instead tracing invisible lines in the dirt, following the echoes of footsteps that no one else could hear. Her voice became a strange melody, half chant, half lament, spoken in tongues older than the stones beneath Bourne. The village held its breath as the rituals unfolded beneath flickering candlelight, hoping to sever the ties that bound Elspeth to the past. Fingers pointed at strangers and neighbors alike, the boundaries of trust eroding beneath the weight of unseen horrors. The manor's ruin became a place avoided after dusk, its silence broken only by the occasional howl of wolves or the shatter of a falling branch. The villagers found Elspeth standing in the garden of the ruined manor, her clothes torn, eyes wild and vacant. She pointed a trembling finger at the darkened woods beyond. "He's coming," she whispered. "He waits behind the trees, waiting for me." Mothers barred doors, clutching their children close, while fathers patrolled the borders with lanterns and loaded muskets, desperate to keep the past at bay. Yet, with each incantation, the girl's condition worsened. Her eyes grew hollow, her voice fell silent for hours, only to return with new fragments of the murder. A whispered argument, the glint of a knife, the scent of crushed violence. Each memory was a blade twisting in her fragile psyche, a story retold through pain and shadow. Some called for exorcism, others whispered of binding spells, while a few darker voices urged mercy for the child, for she was but a victim, trapped in a fate not her own. The villagers whispered that the girl was touched by something unholy, that her soul was fractured, a vessel for pain that should have been buried with Isabella Crane, 80 years dead but never at peace. Would the village condemn the child to suffer for a crime committed long before her time, or could they unravel the tangled threads of memory and madness before it was too late? And the whispered counsel of the old woman known only as Mother Wren, a recluse with a history as dark as the forest. Mother Wren, whose reputation was woven from threads of fear and respect, offered a chilling prophecy. "The past is not dead, child. It feeds on those who remember, and it demands a reckoning." At night, her small body would tremble beneath thin quilts as she whispered the names of people long dead, names that echoed through the corridors of the village's haunted past. "Margaret," she murmured. He took her by the garden gate. She never screamed. Her eyes, wide and haunted, searched the faces of those who dared to listen, searching for answers the living could not give. Her parents, John and Mary, were caught between terror and love, torn between protecting their child and fearing what she had become. Elspeth's days blurred into a waking nightmare. One afternoon, John took Elspeth to the ruins of the old manor, a place where ivy strangled crumbling stone and the wind seemed to carry secrets. She knelt before a broken panel in the garden wall and pressed her fingers against a hollow cavity beneath. "The locket," she said softly. "He hid it here." Her voice trembled with knowledge no child should hold. John dug with trembling hands, uncovering a rusted iron box. Inside lay a delicate silver locket, tarnished but intact. They took it to Father Aldwyn, whose face grew pale as he gazed upon it. This was proof, tangible, undeniable proof, that Elsippa's memories were more than idle fantasies. The priest, torn between faith and fear, began a series of prayers and exorcisms. Meanwhile, the villagers grew restless. Fear seeded suspicion, but the past would not be denied. One moonless night, a scream tore through the village. Sharp, piercing, impossible to ignore. Panic erupted. The village elders convened under trembling candlelight, weighing their options between superstition and survival. As dawn broke, Elspeth's fate hung like a shroud over the shadows lengthened, and the story pressed onward, a dark tide swelling against the fragile shores of reason. The dawn after the scream brought a heavy silence that pressed on Brunamar like a funeral shroud. Elspeth was kept under watch, her small frame fragile as a bird's broken wing, yet her eyes burned with a fury not of this world. He spent hours alone in the chapel, pleading for divine guidance. But the answers came only in dreams, thick with shadow and screams. Agnes McCrae's remedies grew darker, two mixtures of rare herbs and whispered incantations meant to shield the child from the invisible chains that bound her to the past. But even the old healer feared that what haunted Elspeth was no ordinary spirit, no common curse. It was something far older, something born of blood and betrayal. The village, once a place of quiet routine, had become a crucible of fear and despair, every whispered conversation laced with suspicion and dread. The villagers, desperate and terrified, looked to Elspeth's visions for guidance. Fear turned to hysteria. Doors were barred at night, fires burned brighter, and the once close community frayed under the weight of suspicion and grief. Following her trembling finger, a search party uncovered a shallow grave near the ruins of the manor, the soil freshly turned, the earth still warm. The body was that of the missing child. Eyes wide with terror, lips parted as if frozen in a scream, she recounted the night of Isabella Crane's murder with chilling detail. She spoke of a jealous servant, eyes cold as winter, who had discovered Isabella's secret forbidden love affair between the girl and a nobleman. Her parents watched helplessly as their daughter became a vessel of pain, her small hands clutching at the unseen chains that bound her soul. The village, too, stood on the brink, tittering between salvation and ruin, haunted by a child who carried the weight of a murder she had never committed, but could not forget. In a jealous rage, the servant had struck the child down in the cold stone cellar beneath the manor, silencing her forever. The screams that had haunted Elspeth were Isabella's final cries for justice, echoing through time to find a voice once more. The townsfolk debated in hushed tones. Was Elspeth cursed, or was she the key to unveiling a long-buried evil? They realized that Elspeth was not just remembering, she was reliving the trauma, her soul trapped in an endless loop of suffering. "Some stones are best left unturned," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "We risk awakening forces that will swallow us all." His words carried weight, and soon suspicion grew around his family. Whispered accusations that the Cranes had a hand in the tragedy, that their silence had allowed darkness to fester. It was as if the past demanded reckoning, a truth to be unveiled before the shadows could be lifted. Father Aldwyn's faith, once a solid fortress, now wavered. In the days that followed, Elspeth's memories turned from fragmented images to terrifying clarity. The villagers listened, some with horror, others with grim determination. Yet, not all welcomed this revelation. Thomas Crane, a reclusive elder claiming descent from the manor's long-gone occupants, warned the villagers against stirring up old ghosts. The tension reached a boiling point when a child in the village disappeared without trace. Panic gripped Bornemar. The villagers confronted the Cranes, demanding justice, but the family had vanished into the shadows, leaving behind only whispers and rumors. Elspeth, caught between the living and the dead, grew weaker as the line between her memories and reality blurred. The dark tide was rising, and no one could say where it would break. The bitter winds of early winter whipped through Burnham as the village stood at the edge of its own unraveling. Elspeth's body lay frail in her small bed, a pale flicker in a house that seemed swallowed by shadows, and the guilt of a community has forgotten sins. His voice, trembling with a mix of faith and fear, prayed for release for her, and for the village itself. Elspeth's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, the room was filled with a silence so thick it seemed to hold its breath. The letter spoke of forbidden love, betrayal, and a desperate plea for justice from Isabella herself. Elspeth's fever broke. Her eyes, once haunted, softened with the light of peace. Yet, the scars remained etched, not only on her fragile body but on the heart of Bornemar itself. They named the man who had silenced her a nobleman, whose name had been erased from history, but whose guilt was etched into every word, nor the darkness that had seeped into their lives, binding them all in a tapestry of grief and redemption. And in the cold stillness of the night, when the wind whispered through the trees, some swore they heard a child's laughter, a fragile, fleeting sound carried on the breeze, a promise that even the deepest wounds might one day heal. The chest also held Isabella's locket, the very same Elspeth had uncovered, a symbol of a life stolen too soon. Then, in a voice not entirely her own, she spoke. "The truth lies beneath the garden. Find it before the darkness consumes us all." Others believed she was a messenger, the only chance to break a cycle of violence long buried beneath cold earth and silence. The Crane's disappearance only deepened the shadows, feeding the hunger that pulsed beneath the surface of every whispered conversation. Her parents, John and Mary, sat by her side, hands entwined, desperate to hold on to the last threads of their daughter's fading life. But Elspeth was no longer just a child, she was a vessel, a conduit for a darkness that stretched beyond mortal time. The garden, tangled and wild, seemed alive with a restless energy, as though the earth itself awaited their coming. They dug beneath the twisted vines, their shovels breaking through the frozen soil until they struck a weathered chest, sealed tight and hidden from time. The village had split into factions. Some saw Elspeth as a cursed soul, doomed to carry the burden of Isabella Craner's murder one night. As a fierce storm rattled the windows, Father Aldwin knelt at Elspeth's bedside, driven by equal parts hope and terror. John and a small group of villagers braved the storm to return to the old manor-esque ruins. Inside, wrapped in faded velvet, lay letters and tokens, fragments of a story long silenced, with the truth unearthed. The village felt a tremor of release, as if a weight had lifted. The village would never forget the child who remembered her murder in a past life, because some stories demand to be told, even if they come wrapped in shadows.